I'm going to demonstrate how to make through dovetails using the tails first method. It's, I think, a little easier to do than the pins first method, and I think most woodworkers use it when they're making through dovetails. We're going to start by marking the baselines on the ends of each part. So I'm going to set my marking gauge just a little bit thicker, less than a 64th, than the parts. These parts are both the same thickness. So I'll set that just like that. And on the tail board, I'll mark it first. I'm going to mark the faces and the edges, both faces and edges. Got a very sharp pin here, sharpened to a knife edge. On the pin board, I'm only going to mark the faces. So you can see that gives me a very clean line on both parts. So I'm done with the pin board for a little bit. Next, I'm going to mark the tails on here. So I'll put this tail board in the vise. I'm going to use my dovetail marking gauge. This is a 6:1 angle. But before I do that, I need to mark the location of the tails. I want to start about 1/4 to 3/16 in from each edge. And I'm going to put a little dimple in from each edge. So the outer part of each tail will start there. I'm going to put 3 equally spaced tails on here. So I'm going to open this up just to a starting point. I'm going to guess that's about right. So I'm going to start in my first dimple here, and I'm not going to dimple this yet because I don't know if this is set correct. I'm just going to walk this across. And the distance from this dimple here to here, wherever this ends up, that will be the distance between my tails. I want it a little smaller. I basically want it about that dimension. So I need to decrease this a little bit, maybe about like that. We'll try it again. So starting in that first dimple, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that gets me right to the edge. That means this distance will be the distance between my tails. So I like that. So once again, I'll go in that dimple. I'll dimple that and that. Okay, and then I'm going to start from the opposite side and do the same thing. Dimple that and dimple that. And that gives me a nice spacing there. Okay, I'm going to mark the tails now. I've got a dovetail marker that is a 6:1 angle. I could also use a sliding T-bevel, but this is going to be quicker and easier. So I'll align this with the mark here. I've darkened up the marks a little bit. And I want to mark the end and the face. Okay, so there is the dovetails marked out. So now we're ready to start sawing. Before I do that, I'm going to mark the waist to make sure I saw on the correct side of the lines. Okay, I'm ready to start sawing. I've got the board at a good height here. I'm going to saw all the right sides of the tails first, then I'll come back and do the left sides. So I'll start with my thumb off to the back, and I can line the saw up nicely there. On my line, I'll also align it at the correct angle, or I'll try to get close to it. I'm going to make sure I'm relaxed. I've got everything aligned, my finger, my wrist, elbow, shoulder. I've got a good stance here on the ground. left hand on the work and start with a push stroke. Once I start sawing, I want to just keep sawing even if my angle's not correct, because I'd rather have a straight cut that's incorrect than a cut that's crooked. So trying to saw right down to my line. Now come back and do the other side. Trying to stay relaxed the whole time. So that looks pretty good. Happy with that. So next we will cut the waste out of there. I'm going to turn this horizontally, making sure this is level so I can saw vertically over here. I'm going to move my light so I can see a little better on this side of the cut. Do the other side. I'll put this back vertical and I want to saw out the waste using my fret saw. So this fret saw has a very small blade, so it fits down inside there nicely. Okay, so that looks good. I'll raise this up a little bit, make it a little easier to work. I'm going to grab a chisel now to clean up a little bit of crud down there in the corner. That looks okay. This side looks okay. All right, now I've got about a 32nd of an inch of material there. I'm not going to take it all off in one, maybe two passes there. Okay, now I'm down in my scribe line. I want a fairly narrow chisel here. If it's too wide, it's too hard to push. A little hard to control. Then once I've got a line established, it's easy to just move the chisel sideways. There we go. Okay, now notice as I'm making those first cuts, I'm angling up a little bit so that I don't tear out the far side. So I'm going to line my chisel up there and then slide it over. Sometimes those first cuts mash the wood down a little bit and you kind of lose your knife line or your scribe line. It closes up a little bit. All right, that looks good so far. Come in from the other side. I went in a little more than halfway on that first round. These look good over here, I think. I'll put that back in there and slide over. Yeah, so there's very little material there. It needs to be cleaned up. I think this other side, same. Oh, maybe a touch more there. Really want to make sure I get into the corners, right down at the base of the tails there. Okay, same thing here. This one's pretty close. I'm just going to go right in my line to start. There we go. And I'm cutting down at a little bit of an angle just to create a slight hollow there. I don't want to go too too steep, but definitely want to avoid a hump because that would create a gap. Okay, last one. Right in my line. And wiggling the chisel a little bit, that kind of helps me sneak up on that. Don't have to push quite as hard. So I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I can sight through. And my corners look clean. That one needs a little bit of work. There we go. So we're good to go. Next we'll mark the tailboard. So the pinboard gets marked using the tailboard. So I'm going to basically hold this tailboard at about this position and mark this with my marking knife. Now it's going to be hard to hold this. So what I want to do is support the other end of this board. So I'm just going to use this sanding block. Doesn't matter. Any piece of wood will work. So in order to do that, this needs to be at the same height as that. So I'm going to set that like that. We'll tighten that up. So that's at the right height. And now I'll align this. I want to make sure that the base of the tails is even with the inside face of the pinboard. I want to be aligned here. Okay, and because this is supported at each end, if I just push in the middle, it's pretty solid there. Now I'm going to use my marking knife to do this. Now I need a very accurate mark as opposed to earlier the pencil mark was just fine. So I'll use my marking knife here, very light cut at first. Then a couple more passes, so I'm making sure my knife's up against the tail there, but not cutting into it. Do all the right side first. Now I'll come in here to the left side. Once again, very light first pass. Okay, that looks good. Now in order to saw this, I'm going to raise it up a little bit, making sure it's vertical. I'll mark the waist. I want to remove that material where the tails are going to go. And now I'll saw. Now you might want to take your square. I have a saddle square here. You might want to draw some vertical lines here down from these. I'm practiced this a lot, so I can usually saw pretty vertical, so I'm not going to do that, but that might be helpful. So I'll do all the easy ones first, where the line is on the left side of the saw. So now I want to be vertical and match the line that came from the tailboard. So I move my light to the other side, make it a little easier to see. So now I'm peering over the saw with just my right eye to see that line there. Okay, I'll use once again the fret saw to remove that material. Notice I'm using a two-handed grip on this saw. Seems like overkill, but it really gives you a lot of control. And once again, I got my finger pointing down the direction of cut. Now I will remove that material, just like before. So more material to remove here. Let's take a little longer. Get all the way into the corners. Okay, that looks okay. No, not quite. Okay, I got less. It's like less than a 32nd there, so Pretty happy with that. So once I've got one cut here, it's best just to move over and take just a little bit at a time. Really gives you a lot of control. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Get down here. Now I did, looks like I missed my line on this one. So I'm going to pare a little bit. I want to pare from the outside face in. So if I do get some tear out, it'll be on the inside of the cut there. And I want to pare this way, not this way, because coming down, you never know which way the grain's going. It might want to dig in. So it works best to pare perpendicular to the grain direction. There we go. So I'll kind of roll that down a little bit. As long as I'm doing this, I just see the rest of these look pretty good. A little hair material there. That looks okay there. So I think that's pretty clean. I'll just make sure once again the bottom's good. Okay, I think we're ready to see how this fits. Okay, so I hold that up there and seems pretty good. Now look here. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Don't really see any gaps there. No gaps there. Yeah, I think that's a good one. We'll stick with that.